Hello, everyone. I am very excited today to get a chance to interview and be in conversation with Kristina Lea, who co-authored the book with me, From Trauma to Freedom, One Woman's Journey and a Holistic Guide for Healing. And let me just tell you a little bit about Kristina, and then we'll get into our conversation. Kristina is a gifted healer, counselor, and life coach. She utilizes many methods of healing, including zero balancing, biofield tuning, Reiki, Chinese energetic medicine, shamanic healing, as well as integrating her intuitive gifts to help people get to the root of their trauma in this lifetime and in past lifetimes in order to heal and step more fully into their wholeness and into their purpose. It's beautiful work. She has training and has trained in psychosynthesis, life coaching, and also has training and extensive experience in counseling and working with trauma. And I just want to say before we get into our conversation that it was really extraordinary doing the book with Kristina. This is a book that really shares her own profound journey of healing. And as a clinical psychologist, I'll say that, Kristina, your story is one of the most severe stories of early trauma that I've heard. So it's profound how you share your journey through your own healing process and then, kept that vision for 20 years as you explored becoming a healer yourself, and then are sharing your journey and everything you've learned about healing in that book. And I bring my own background and experience to bear in the process also. So it was profound to be writing that book with you. But what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about trauma and how we are experiencing that and needing to heal from that individually as well as collectively right now in this really intense time of transition and transformation that we're in. And how do we actually heal? And talk a little bit about the model for healing that we outline in the book. But let's start with talking about trauma and PTSD in particular, post-traumatic stress disorder, which, we all have experienced some degree of trauma or another. And post-traumatic stress disorder is how that trauma impacts us, shapes the ways that we think, the way that we act, the way that we feel, what triggers us, in a way that that trauma is still in us, controlling us way far after the acute experience of the trauma itself. But can you say a little bit more about that and how you work both with really early trauma as well as people that have experienced trauma later in their lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Heather. And thank you for having me join this conversation. I like that piece about when you did the introduction about including the past lives, and whether you're believing in past lives or not, we definitely have lineage trauma that we come into. So often people come in and say, well, I have little t trauma, or I don't have a lot of trauma, but I have all these, blocks or patterns that seem trauma related. So then we start to look what was going on when they were in utero, what is their lineage, what culture do they come out of? Because all of these experiences also have their impressions that become imprints or more hardwired or hard grooved into the system. So mental, emotional, spiritual, really into the DNA. Definitely when we're speaking energy, definitely changes the energetic patterns. So I say we're all in trauma. We're all in PTSD. I would say we're all in PTSD. We may not all be in active trauma right now, but we've certainly come out of that personally, collectively. So I think it's an extremely important issue that we are really looking at, addressing, and certainly has been my life path. And I know it has been a large part of your life path. because I feel like if we don't heal, we don't have the capacity to then look outside ourselves, our own trauma states, our own just trying to survive states, to really be able to be more conscious about our impact on the planet, and our impact, I guess, with each other. So just the world.
But that's a really good point too, because, as you and I talk about in the book, for most of us, we experience trauma in the context of relationships. And you make such a good point that may be our immediate family relationships, that may be other experiences with people in our lives, but it also can be our ancestral lineage, our cultural heritage, our past lives. But we both experience trauma in the context of relationships and then play out the reactions to that trauma in our relationships with each other in a way that we perpetuate then the wounding and the trauma as we get triggered and act out or play out past painful patterns with each other and in relationship with the earth. But can you talk a little bit about some of those primary ways of coping when you have PTSD or you're carrying trauma?
I think a primary way, if we're not conscious, we're not consciously, I guess, in conscious in the process, or I want to say in life, because that's pretty broad. But if we're not really actively consciously looking at our behavior, our thoughts, our emotional states, then we often play out our trauma by projecting out what is unresolved in the unconscious. And there are various ways to do that. We also talk about fawning in the book. It's another way that we kind of cope or play out the trauma. But did you want me to add, is this kind of what you're asking?
Yes, and maybe we could also just, since you talked about fawning, talk about the core responses to trauma that then can become more ongoing patterns. The, fight, flight, freeze, as well as fawning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just that fight or flight, I guess, really is the trauma that's activated with the sympathetic nervous system, activates there. And the freeze is more of the parasympathetic nervous system is, I guess, heightened or activated. And I guess if we step back a little bit, we talk about trauma, what happens when trauma occurs in the experience, that it is often too overwhelming for the body, for the system. So it doesn't store as a normal experience unless one is helped through that. So then it packs away, it fragments, kind of gets tucked away so that we can live through it. And so that those trauma states are still active within the body, within the psyche, within the nervous system. And sometimes they go often I think they go very deep, especially if they're extreme or pre-verbal. And they aren't, usually activated back up, pulled back up until we experience something in our external environment. And I would say, speaking energetically, that that happens because, the universe is really helping to support us heal. And the only way we can heal is to really unearth these things. So it's not a negative, it's actually a positive, this triggering effect, because, we have something that appears and often keeps reappearing or coming back through in themes and patterns in our lives. And, kind of in a supportive way to help us really see what's still underground, what really needs to be looked at, acknowledged, taken care of, so that it can come back into coherence and release.
That's really, I think, a really important point. And one of the things that I've talked about in some of my videos from an astrological perspective is I think a lot of the transits that we're in right now are really bringing more fully to the surface those things that are buried, those things that are in the shadows, those aspects of ourselves where we're still caught in past trauma. And I think that's playing out individually and collectively. And I think you're also saying a really important point that when we haven't released or cleared that trauma, and I know this as a, from my background in neuropsychology, those parts of us are frozen in time in the trauma. And when it does get triggered, then it's as if we're back in that traumatic experience in the present moment, acting out those ways of trying to cope and protect ourselves. And as much as in the present moment, fight, flight, freeze, just getting paralyzed, or fawning as an ongoing coping mechanism, is the attempt to please the other, accommodate the other to stay safe. Even those patterns are in the moment protective mechanisms. When they get locked in as ongoing behavior patterns, they work against us. They create more trauma. And I feel like we're seeing that in how we interact with each other interpersonally, but we're also seeing that collectively. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, crisis kind of follows people who have had trauma. I mean, I certainly was for me. Just seemed like there was always a type of crisis going on. But I think that just because when you're triggered and then you're in it, it's hard to pull away from it enough to have some space to then get more conscious of maybe what is actually going on here. I think everybody's been in a conversation or a situation where their trauma has been activated and the other person or even within themselves, this doesn't make sense, but every part of my being is, saying this is real. But you and the other person might feel like there's something else in the room going on here that I have no clue what this is about, something like that. So I think there are lots there. I'm going to say there's different avenues to healing, but I feel like one of the most effective ones is to kind of build the skill of being able to create space from the reactivity. Because when you're reacted, you have that strong reaction come up, then it's really just directly tied in, usually to something much deeper if the reaction is pretty strong. And if in the moment you can kind of have the space to step back, do some inner work, then you can take that deeper and go all the way maybe to the root, to actually what's going on. And you're in direct contact with the trauma. And you can then be able to begin to bring the trauma up in a gentle, safe way, and then be able to release it really out of the body or bring it back into organization or coherence. And, and I just want to speak here energetically. Is that okay? Because that's kind of more
Absolutely
my background. We're finding more and more today that everything kind of breaks down to energy frequency. And Heather, you and I have talked about that, but that's a big part of my work is, when people say, what does it mean to heal? I often say, it's just coming back home. It's just coming back to who you are, to the authenticity or the truth or the essence of your being. And I think when we experience trauma, even in utero, it's when we are in our essence, when we are in our flow, when our energy is moving and organized and coherent, and then something comes in to disrupt that. And if it's large enough, then we call that a trauma, and it really changes the wave or frequency frequencies that are moving through us. And so I feel like as we heal, we're finding that trauma or those frequencies that have been disrupted. We're bringing organization or coherence. Often that can come through silence, just coming back into a very, I want to say, coherent state. But as we do that, then they release, they reorganize, and then we're more and more just who we actually are. And I think as we go through that process, and there's many ways to do that, then we can kind of unpack, unwind the patterns. We get all the ahas. Oh, I see where I do this. I see what happened there. I see where that belief came in. And then we start to really grow in wisdom. We have that soul expansion. To me, that's the gold of the experience of the trauma. So, to me, we have come, to the planet to experience this great separation from source, from the divine, from ourselves, from each other. And, that to me is trauma. But as we come back and pull in our own fragmentation and, heal within ourselves and with each other in relationship, then we're able to kind of glean and then we have kind of the reward. If we don't, then we just have more trauma because we just keep reenacting it, like you had said. But
yeah, that's my sense is that we come to the earth actually to be in an accelerated process of change and transformation. Mm-hmm. And all too often we can get caught in situations that wound us in that process. But like you're saying, as we face that, feel that, heal that, we're in an accelerated process of evolution and growth and deepening and expanding consciousness. And it feels like this time in particular, we're really being encouraged individually and collectively to do that healing process. And I know that part of your healing work is, and what we talk about in the book is healing on all levels, physically, emotionally, spiritually, energetically. But I know that part of the power in your work is you're not only helping people release those blocks that come from trauma that affect how they feel, that affect how they interact with other people, that affect their beliefs, but that you often are also helping them clear energetic imprints that they may not even be aware of in their energy field that are, would you say it's influencing them to get caught in situations that repeat that trauma pattern because that imprint of what's occurred to them is still there until that energy is cleared? Is that a good way to put that?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, comment. I would say it's, if I'm speaking energetically, it's more of a frequency. So that trauma has created its own frequency, its own wave patterns, and it is what is pulling in from the external to match that. And then when we heal that, we really are bringing that back into kind of like organization. Then, yeah, there is, okay, that's a whole other tangent, but yes, and then it has the ability to match that. So when it comes back, right, it's just more and more dropping the layers, I guess, or removing what isn't us. So then we just are more in these states of peace, love, flow, and then that's what you attract in. Really, you can then use more of your consciousness to really be clear about what you want and what you want to attract in. If you're clear here, but you have all this muck down here, it's really our unconscious what's attracting in, because our mind can think, all right, I'm going to have all these affirmations about what I want or how I want to manifest or how I even want to live my life or who I want my partner to be. But the reality is that's not really who pulls those things in. It's really what's underneath. And again, the gift is because it's really seeking and really demanding to be seen, I would say, so that it can ultimately heal. Your body will naturally wants to heal. It wants to come back into flow states. It wants to come back into balance. So I think that's what it is, always, always our friend, always our biggest ally is the body, and actually what's happening around us.
So it's like the body naturally remembers being in harmony, being in balance. And we all are a part of cosmic consciousness that lives in the harmony of the spheres. So it seems like you're describing, we can get discordant, we can get out of harmony, out of balance in these other frequencies when we've experienced trauma. And what you're describing is how we can, through that healing journey, come back into our true nature and that true harmonic state of being. But I think you're also beautifully describing, with talking about frequencies, that when we're caught in trauma, caught in fear, caught in overwhelm, depression, anger, we're operating at a lower level of consciousness in terms of our frequency, our vibrational level. And it's as we heal and clear those frequencies that are caught in the trauma or the trauma reaction, that we then have the capacity to move into higher states of consciousness, love, joy, peace. And part of what you and I have talked about a lot is that we can't move into those higher states of consciousness without healing. Otherwise, we're kind of in a spiritual bypass where part of us may disconnect from the unconscious parts of us to try to tap into those states. But like you said, there's this whole other unconscious part of us that's still caught in these frequencies of fear, anger, depression, terror. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about the emotional healing work that you do is the parts work, where can you talk a little bit about that, about how you actively help people to connect to those parts of them that are still in pain and hidden in the shadows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like, that's a really good point, is that we can live in, we can have moments of peace or love or joy. But it's not like we hit a level of consciousness, we kind of stay at that level and then we level up. And certainly if we have, large pockets in the unconscious that are really still active in a, fear or separation or whatever, the kind of the lower states, that's kind of the wholeness of who we are. It all counts. So, and that does kind of lead us into I think the parts work, working the unconscious. We call that the consciousness section of the part of the arch model.
So should we back off before we talk about parts work and really talk about the arch model?
Maybe.
So let's do that. And let me just say, before you get into talking more specifically about it, that I think it's a very powerful model, and it really follows the template of your journey of healing. And part of what we've also integrated it with is the shamanic understanding of the medicine wheel, which is such a powerful energetic archetype for honoring the wholeness of who we are, our interconnectedness with all that is, and coming into right balance, right harmony, alignment with our true selves, our soul selves, and with the earth and with each other and cosmic consciousness. So it's so all encompassing and all inclusive. But talk a little bit about the specifics of the arch model and how it's actually guiding people through that healing journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as you know, our process through writing the book, if I could just step back there for a moment, and just through the experience of not really knowing I was going to write a book, but really feeling like keep everything. And I think always my my desire through the process was if I could help one person, then that would be, that would make a lot of meaning out of my suffering. And it has. But it was kind of during that time, and then the time that we were together writing that book, and really trying to pull together something that would be not just the depth, but the breadth that is needed to really have full healing. When we talked at the beginning about what is healing, and having all those file folders, just so much material, and how do we break this down? How do we organize this? And then the ARCH just really coming in an organic way, I would say in a divine way. And then being able to step back and say, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. And it's continuing to make more and more sense, and feeling like, we've often talked that the book is its own entity. It has its own consciousness about it. So anyway, we start with alignment. We go back again to alignment. It is that stillness inside. It is that place of complete coherence. And
but you also say it's where you, as you said earlier, step back instead of being caught in whatever the behavior or the trigger is. You connect with a witness self that allows you to kind of observe what's going on instead of being in it and identified with it.
I like that. So, as we have often talked, that it starts with that witness self. As we step into alignment, it's really starting with the space to get you into a witness or observer self. But then you can drop deeper and deeper into more of your soul self, which is the part of you that goes on and on through incarnations. And then you can drop even deeper into more of kind of that stillness, the presence, pure consciousness. And that we yogis have talked for a long time about, before there was sound, before there was frequency, vibration, the foundation of that is silence. So when we go there, it's like really going back to the beginning. And then from there, we're kind of we're in the right space to then begin to look at, all right, how are we in relationship with ourselves? What's out of balance? What's needing to be looked at? What's needing to change, come back into health and harmony? What do our relationships look like with other people, with creatures, with animals, with trees, with food, with alcohol? It's like the whole gamut of how are we in relationship. And then we kind of move on to see our consciousness, and they all are kind of, it's not linear. This is ARCH. We move in and out of these just as we can the medicine wheel. But then in consciousness, we begin to pull up very gently. Often it's already pulled up, because that's like we talked before, that's what is happening in efforts to, for us to really see, but really pulling up what's in the unconscious to see what needs healing, what needs to finally be honored, what needs, finally to be seen and have a voice. And this is where we really look at the parts of ourselves, really looking at the parts of the trauma, but often they can come through as literally parts of ourselves that kind of got locked in those trauma states and tucked away, and they've been quiet and kind of in maybe not quiet, but they have been quiet to us. And so we're looking to really bring in our fragmentation, come back into a whole being. And then
before you move off the parts, I think, part of what I think is so key in that is that those parts are able to heal as they're finally heard and seen and held. And it may be a 2-year-old part that experienced a trauma that was never resolved, that was never seen, heard, supported. Or it could be a 7-year-old or an adolescent or an adult part of the self that gets split off because it was too painful to deal with in the moment. But one of the things that's powerful in what I've learned from you in terms of the parts work is that those traumatized parts can manifest either as, younger parts of ourselves, or you often are working with them through a body symptom or through, other ways in which they may be manifesting to try to get our attention, to try to come into awareness for healing. So it can present itself in such a myriad of ways, but it feels like a lot of your work is trying to help the person finally see and reclaim what those parts are trying to communicate. Does that fit?
Mhm. Yeah, I really like that, because everybody's landscape is different. So there's not just one way to do parts work or one way to do healing. This is definitely a template, but I often find that people tuck their trauma away in ways that are unique to them and to their system. And as it's pulled back up, it comes in either the symbolism or through the body, or the way that it needs to come back into expression and for that individual. So we stay very, very open and organic with the process, and we're very curious, and we're very accepting of whatever comes forward. But it is really a gift to see how creative the body and the mind and the psyche can be. It's brilliant.
It is, isn't it?
Yes, and I really like that piece. Thank you, about saying that sometimes or often, because I find this is true, that the wound is in the not being seen and the not being acknowledged. And that's why that piece is so critical. Sometimes people come in for energy work, or shamanic work, and they just want the imprint to go. And it doesn't, or it will come back, because there's an integration that needs to happen. And again, that's where you're able to bring things into consciousness, be able to work it so that it can really shift the patterns long term. But I think it is about respect, and it's about an honoring. It's about showing up, face to face with the trauma, to reclaim. And that's, yeah.
And holding those parts in compassion, letting them finally feel like they're cared for, that they matter.
Yeah, because I think if you just, say, okay, how do I get rid of this trauma? How do I get out of this? Then it's almost a message to, your young selves. How do I, fix you up so that you can stop making my life crazy
and get rid of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead, and this is something that you bring through in the book over and over again, and that I, experience in interacting with you from your journey, that you've truly understood the gifts of what comes through working through that healing and integration process, and the way in which it deepens our understanding of ourselves, of each other, our compassion, our wisdom, our consciousness. But talk a little bit more about the final section of the Arch model, healing.
So healing is just, there's so many tools to help support this process. And you're so gifted at bringing in, that spiritual component. But I think that it's been really interesting to see how other clients and other people work to bring their own healing to themselves. So they, I have people, say things that I would never have thought of, but there are many things to help support. There's essential oils, there's, I don't know, we could just like
ceremonies, affirmations, the deeper emotional identification of what you're feeling and releasing it. Yeah, we really cover a whole spectrum, again, because as you were saying before, it's ultimately about bringing to awareness what's needing to heal, holding that with compassion, so that then the intensity of the trauma can release And then we can integrate the deeper awareness or the reclaiming of those lost parts of ourselves. And you talk about this a lot, that those parts that hold trauma that get split off within us are also parts that hold our energy, our gifts, our strengths. So in reclaiming that, we're coming, as you said earlier, more into wholeness, which then leads to, the beauty of the arch model is you go through these different phases, and as you said, can go back and forth and work what needs to be worked in the journey. But ultimately we come to center, which is where we reclaim our wholeness, our alignment with our true selves, with the earth, the sky, cosmic consciousness, all that is. It's ultimately that path to integration and wholeness and higher consciousness.
And I also would add to life purpose, because once you're really in the center and you have worked the relationship within yourself, worked enough healing, that you've reclaimed your energy, actually you reclaim a lot of your light too. You're really able to just kind of be in that stillness, that organic flow that's trying to move through you in your own creativity, what you're meant to like bring to the planet. So I think that's the beauty of coming to the center is, and you don't have to, go through all your healing to then move into life purpose, but often it takes enough healing to move out of kind of the crisis states, out of patterns, to really just be more open energetically and just logistically in life, to then begin to really create from that truth, within the center of you.
It's I think so powerful as you're talking about that, because then you're able to be in your purpose. And I do believe that each of us is on the planet to be in the uniqueness of who we are, to be that unique spark of divine consciousness, to manifest, to create what only we uniquely can express. And so as we heal, we're freeing up that energy for our purpose, for our creativity, for moving into higher consciousness. Mm-hmm. And some of what I think is so important about this book, and so important that you've had this vision for the book and so shared your own journey of healing, is because not only is that important in our own personal evolution, but a lot of what I talk about from an astrological perspective is the critical time we're in on the planet right now. That this is such a huge time of transition and transformation as we move from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, and are at that critical juncture in our history as humanity that happens every 12,000 years, of the earth going through changes, her own healing journey, and humanity collectively going through a shift in consciousness. And it's a call for us to heal in order to move into these higher states of consciousness. Yeah, and part of what's concerned me is we have collective PTSD too. We carry in our cellular memory awareness of these past experiences on the planet in these 12,000 year cycles, where we've gone through a cataclysmic reset. And if we don't work that trauma, we're in danger of getting caught in fight, flight, freeze, fawning, and, playing into that trauma happening again, rather than healing and moving into a radically new consciousness and new way of being that we're capable of individually and collectively.
Yes, definitely. I mean, where the planet is going, we're going to need to empty out our density if we want to go with her. And,
That's a good way to put it, density. The trauma is heavy energy, isn't it?
It really is. So we've often talked about how, we're seeing this play out with, like those who are really working their process in a conscious way really are just popping into these wonderful states of quick healing, or quicker, rapid, more so than ever before. And also just really this drive to, be in joy, lightness of being, really thriving on the planet. And then we also see the other sides, like we're seeing definitely the extremes, more and more the extremes of then others who are not, and moving further into their addiction or further into trauma, reactivity. So, again, we start with alignment. I think that's so crucial to where we are individually and collectively, that if we can have space, lots of space throughout the day to kind of have the space from our reactive thoughts or emotions or behaviors, that we begin to really be able to then look and be able to unwind, or be able to start a process of healing. But also we are starting to then change the energetic patterns within us just by doing that, just by the space, because then you're dropping more into stillness and less into that compulsiveness that reactivity often has. And the more compulsive you are and quick, instinctual to just move, react, think, emotion, then it continues to hardwire or hard drive or build those patterns. So just by being more conscious, which is by dropping into alignment with that more space, and you're able to be more conscious, you're already starting the healing process.
Well, you're making a really good point that when we don't take that space, we can get caught in reactivity, in our compulsive patterns of thought or feeling or behaving. We can get caught in survival mode. But I think you're also really saying, part of what can happen on the planet right now too, because this is such an intense time and we are so interconnected with each other, and we're bombarded by social media and by the news, and there is so much trauma in the world right now, with war and gun violence, all that manifestation of fight and flight. We literally have thousands of people fleeing trauma in their countries, and freeze, a lot of people getting increasingly caught in despair, overwhelm. We're seeing people getting more and more caught in addictions as a way of trying to numb or get, distance from the trauma around them. Or fawning. That to me is a really intense coping mechanism. We're seeing that as people get caught in fear, and as we have crises like the pandemic, it's easy then when you get caught in fear, to give your power away to those that are in positions of authority and tell you how you can be safe. And fawning is that effort to, if I do what they tell me to do, I'll be okay. And that, not that there aren't well-meaning authorities and people that are trying to support us, but that I think one thing that's really crucial is, in alignment, we have to come back to our own hearts. We have to come back to our own inner knowing and not give our power away to anyone. And that's part of what's crucial in order to heal individually, and in order to support the collective healing. We have to come back into our own inner center and awareness, and then be on that path of healing and awakening, to hold a different energetic for the planet also.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's individually and collectively, it's it can be very challenging to not get kind of swept up in the overwhelm of what's happening. And I just feel like it's probably going to be getting more intense on the planet. And so it makes it more crucial to have a practice or a vigilance to coming back into the stillness of your own being. It's the place inside that isn't transient. It stays permanent. So as things move and come and go, throughout the day, throughout the week, externally, internally, emotion, thought, coming and going. There's the respite within your own being to come back into the silence. And as you sit in that and are in that energetic, that is what begins to build within you, not the chaos. And then that stillness becomes more what's in the forefront, and everything else becomes more background. So that as you're in the world, it doesn't have the overwhelm. If you're in your trauma, it also doesn't overwhelm you, because you have built this alignment in a very solid way. And I do love that piece, because I think that is where our truth is. It's, it's definitely where our truth is. And it's that resonance that it's going to keep us at a vibration that's going to really facilitate in a gentle way us moving through these times.
I love what you said at the very beginning, like that's coming home. That's really coming home to that inner stillness, to that true self, to that soul self that never dies, that is here to experience and grow and learn, and not be identified with this personality self or this chaos. But the other thing I think you're talking about that's beautiful is once we find our way to that center, that alignment, that inner stillness, it's like finding the stillness in the midst of the hurricane. It's like finding the eye of the storm. And once we experience that, you don't forget it. You may lose your bearings and get caught in the whirlwind again, or get caught up in what's going on in the world, but you know that stillness is there to come back to. That center, that eye of the storm, that place of refuge is there. It's always there inside. So there's a path back. And I think that's part of what you talk a lot about in the book too. And the different ways, the different meditations, the different, walking in nature, the ways to find that place back to that sense of stillness and true home, true center inside.
Yeah, because we all naturally do it throughout the day. We often don't recognize it or don't pay attention to it, and then don't place enough importance on that. But we're already often doing that. But there's so many different avenues or paths to that. And again, I really like that idea about coming back. It brings you back to your own truth. And I think because we're gonna need that, we're gonna need that inner compass.
Wow.
And we have the power within ourselves for that, whether it's through our healing journey or through how to navigate these times.
That's a really good point, that there's so much turmoil in the world right now about what's true, what's real, what's false, what's illusion. And I think you're making a really good point that when we come back to that inner center, we know the truth. We know what's true. When we come back to our heart, trust our intuition, trust our connection to cosmic consciousness. It's there within us. You don't have to look for it outside of us. And I like what you said earlier about this is a time where it does feel like people's healing can happen in a more accelerated way, and that more and more people are healing and awakening. And then I think it is about finding those relationships with others in our tribe so that we can support each other. Then we can support each other in staying conscious and moving into this higher consciousness in this intense time. And then we can support each other in our ongoing healing journeys also, and be in community and connection with each other in co-creative ways. So it's such a time of hope and potential and radical shifts into these new ways of being, even in the midst of the turmoil and the intensity. We're seeing, like you said earlier, that full spectrum.
Yeah, I think, and this is just the truth of my being, so it might not be everybody's truth. Not everybody might resonate with this, but I really feel that, and And I can even say this coming out of the intensity of my trauma. I might not have, I definitely did not feel this as I was in the trauma or even healing from the trauma. But more and more, I'm feeling that really everybody's exactly where they need to be. And that the universe is really supporting each one of us on our own soul journeys and our own soul evolutions. So as we look out and see other people's circumstances, maybe not judge that so quickly in our own, with our own minds or our own emotion. And certainly doing that within our own lives and our own experiences, to really come back. That's so crucial, to come back to the deepest part of you. So, because that will give you, a lot of direction and a lot of understanding, I think, about, maybe what is going on collectively, but certainly individually, and guidance there. But my truth is that the universe is extremely loving and supporting of each one of us, and no one is forgotten, and everyone is held. And I don't say that as just flowery words on this very cruel and dark world that we often look out on, but that is from my own truth. And so just kind of holding that, and maybe encouraging others to find that within themselves, because there is, I think it's helpful when we can kind of make sense of things, although that's not always possible. And maybe the sense doesn't come from our minds, but it comes somewhere deep within us, that we can be in this soup and still have this place of inner knowing that this is somebody's got this. Something much larger than us is holding all of this.
Mm. That's beautiful, that we are held in that energy of love and wisdom of the cosmos. We're not alone in this. But you're also, I think, so beautifully talking about how then we can hold each other with compassion instead of judging each other, projecting onto each other, getting caught in the polarization that's so intense on the planet. We can actually hold space for the diversity of each of our experiences and where we are in our journeys, and hold each other with that compassion, even when we don't fully understand or can't get the deeper meaning of what's going on. We can still come from the heart and hold that place of love and compassion.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that we are not an activist, or we don't stand up and say no to something. If that's our truth and we are led by, this is what I need to do on the planet right now, it doesn't mean we're just sit back. And it doesn't mean that. It means that whatever we're doing it out of love and out of peace, even if it's a strong pushback to something. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, because it isn't about a passivity of everything goes. It's more, as you were saying earlier, it's more about focusing on being in our own center and in alignment with our true self. Then we are actually on the path of our purpose on the planet, whatever that is. And part of what I've experienced with that, and you and I have talked about this a lot, when you're in that alignment with your true self and with your purpose, you feel it. And often it can mean taking action or taking risks or doing things that other people won't understand, that don't seem to make sense to them, but we're no longer being controlled by other people's expectations or conventional reality. It's really living from that inner center and our own inner knowing of our true truth and our purpose, and how to be acting and expressing and living from that place.
Yeah, because we need everybody doing their purpose right now, especially the people who are watching this in this YouTube. Everybody needs to be doing their purpose. It's time. So I would say definitely Really, if you're kind of on the fence of stepping in, gather your tribe, be courageous, step out, because you're here and it's important. Your purpose is important.
Yeah, we've all chosen to incarnate in this very intense and powerful time. And I do really appreciate this community and how much there is an energy of supporting each other and healing and awakening and being in that process. As you talk about in the book, being a part of the rainbow tribe, holding that light and energy and love for the planet in this time. So thank you for being in this conversation today. And tell people how they can be in contact with you if they want to connect with you, or because your healing work and the energy work that you do and the healing work that you do on all levels is something you do long distance as well as in person. Mm-hmm. So how do people connect with you?
The best way to connect, I think, is through my website. It's opentotruefreedom.com. Yes. And we'll put I don't know, I don't go to it so often, but that's it. opentotruefreedom.com. And will you put a link?
I'll put a link down below and a link
just in case I don't have that right, but I think that's right. Yeah. And of course the book, I think, is one of the drives for Heather and I to write the book, if I can speak for us, Heather, is to get more healing to more people and more tools. So we really believe in the book. And that ultimately you are your best healer. Doesn't mean that you don't need help or support, but know that you have the tools and you have the power within you. But I think the book is a great guide.
And thank you for saying that, because I know that's something dear to both of our hearts, is to help those who don't easily have access to therapy or healing or other services, to have some support through the resources in that book to find their own path. And I might just say that we're also hoping to put up, we should also say the other site people can go to is transformingtraumatofreedom.com, where we have a lot of information about the Arch model, about the book. And hopefully by September, we'll have some modules up for people to be guided through some of the steps of the healing journey for themselves. But thank you for the profound work that you're doing on the planet in this time, Kristina.
Thank you. And to you as well, Heather. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care, everyone. Blessings.